A few months ago we made a video highlighting 10 PlayStation 4 games that had been improved for the PlayStation 5. Since then, dozens of additional PlayStation 4 titles have been upgraded for Sony's current-gen console, boasting advancements such as faster frame rates, higher resolutions, ray tracing, and support for the DualSense controller. We couldn't, in good faith, just sit back and let those games go unappreciated, so I'm here once again to give you a list of 10 more PlayStation 4 titles that are better than ever on PlayStation 5. As was the case in the previous video, I'll be covering a range of titles that fit into one of two categories: PlayStation 4 games that have received Game Boost patches, granting them improvements when played via the PlayStation 5's backwards compatibility mode, and native PlayStation 5 re-releases. All footage in this video has been captured on a PlayStation 5 in full 4K at 60 frames per second, in order to give you the most accurate impression of what these experiences look like when played on the console itself. Even though YouTube does actually compress the bitrate quite a lot, so it's not like entirely accurate, but that's a YouTube problem, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, enough dilly-dallying. I'm Liam from Push Square, and let's get started. I have a real soft spot for Zombie Army 4 Dead War. It's a proper B-movie video game, complete with a hammy story, ridiculous undead enemies, and buckets upon buckets of oozing zombie blood. A spin-off from developer Rebellion's much-loved Sniper Elite series, Zombie Army expands upon the tight sniper-focused combat systems seen in the mainline games, allowing players to chew through hordes of ghouls with a variety of World War II-era weaponry. Thanks to a recent patch, the game runs even better on PlayStation 5 via backwards compatibility. Boasting a rock-solid 60 frames per second and a full 4K resolution, Zombie Army looks and plays wonderfully on PlayStation 5 without any of the compromises found when playing on a PlayStation 4. A delight. Metro Exodus's depiction of a nuclear-ravaged Russia already looked stunning on PlayStation 4, but its dedicated PlayStation 5 port improves upon the original version in every single way. For starters, the game now runs at 60 frames per second in full 4K, compared to 30 frames per second and a checkerboard 4K resolution on PlayStation 4 Pro. It's a world apart from base PlayStation 4 performance especially, which could see frames dropping to as low as 16 despite being rendered at 1080p. Best of all, the game maintains this rock-solid performance even with the addition of ray-traced global illumination and ray-traced emissive lighting, which transforms scenes entirely on Sony's new console. Sharp visuals, soft lighting, and solid frames. Is there anything better? But the improvements don't just stop there. Long loading times, a bugbear of ours on the PlayStation 4 version, have been dramatically reduced, while DualSense support adds nuanced adaptive trigger effects based not only on your equipped weapon, but also its attachments. Alongside existing gameplay mechanics, such as swapping out air filters or wiping mutant gunk off your gas mask, these additional features help elevate Exodus's sense of immersion to unseen new heights. A phenomenal version of an already pretty great game. Final Fantasy VII Remake left us stunned when it launched in 2020. Despite our lofty expectations for the long-awaited retread, Final Fantasy VII Remake delivered on its promise to recreate the PS1 RPG classic for modern consoles. Beautiful graphics were matched with an updated real-time combat system, resulting in one of our favourite games of the year. Compared to other games on this list, Remake's PlayStation 5 upgrade, dubbed INTEGRADE, is a fairly modest one. Other than some subtle visual tweaks, the biggest draw here is the native version's improved frame rates, which double them from 30 to 60 on PlayStation 5. I'm not exaggerating when I say that playing Final Fantasy VII Remake at 60 frames per second feels transformative. Combat feels snappier, the faster frames highlighting the game's incredible animation and particle work, and watching the action slow to a smooth crawl when giving orders mid-fight is jaw-dropping. Final Fantasy VII Remake was already a technical achievement on PlayStation 4, but the game feels even more at home on PlayStation 5. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is the most interesting entry on this entire list. Unlike every other game, Sekiro has never officially received a patch that enables it to run better on the PlayStation 5. Instead, the game originally shipped with an unlocked frame rate, which allows the game to be as fast as the hardware can handle. Developers tend to avoid this approach on console. It can often lead to games jumping from, as high as 60 frames to as low as 20 if they're not optimized correctly, which can be nauseating, but thankfully From Software decided to leave Sekiro's frames uncapped. This means that on PlayStation 5, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. In comparison, on PlayStation 4, the game ran at 30 frames per second with some frame pacing issues. Considering the game's combat revolves around precisely parrying enemy attacks the second before they hit you, Sekiro at 60 frames per second just feels right. From sword fights to movement, all of Sekiro's considered mechanics shine brighter at this higher frame rate. There are some compromises. The game still runs at a checkerboard 4K, which is fine, but considering the game has received no additional patches, it's a remarkable improvement compared to playing the game on previous gen hardware. Activision's monolithic Battle Royale, Call of Duty Warzone, benefits greatly from the increased power of Sony's current-gen console. A recent update allows players with access to a TV or monitor capable of displaying 120Hz to play the game at an astonishing 120 frames a second. The enhanced frame rate makes the already speedy shooter feel even quicker, and is all but guaranteed to give those with fast reflexes a greater advantage on the battlefield. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't currently support frame rates higher than 60, so you're just going to have to trust me that this footage was captured in 120 frames per second. This is all achieved via a patch for the PlayStation 4 version of the game, a feat that developers previously believed was nigh on impossible for games running via backwards compatibility. That said, a native PlayStation 5 version is on the way, promising additional improvements such as an FOV slider. Those with a HDMI 2.0 cable can experience this blisteringly fast frame rate at 1080p, while players who shelled out for a fancy HDMI 2.1 cable can play the game in glorious 4K. As someone who's only briefly dipped their toe into COD Royale, I found the increased frame rates allowed me to survive for approximately a quarter of a second longer than usual before an 8-year-old guns me down from an unseen vantage point. I am too old to play this game. Doom Eternal's native PlayStation 5 version includes 3 distinct graphic options that transform the game in meaningful ways compared to its last-gen counterpart. First, there's Ray Tracing mode, which adds fancy new lighting and reflection effects. Running at 60 frames per second at a resolution of 1800p, this mode adds some much appreciated next-gen visuals that look lovely. Balance mode, however, may be the better choice for those not too fussed about the enhanced reflections. Running at 60 frames per second in full 4K, this mode offers a crisper picture without sacrificing frames. Doom Eternal is such a blisteringly fast game, with players forced to move constantly if they want to stay alive against the hordes of hell, that you don't really notice that puddles of blood reflect the walls realistically when you're chainsawing an imp in half. What's more is that every graphics mode increases the game's visuals from those found in the PlayStation 4 version, meaning the game still looks great even on this balanced setting. However, I do have to say that my personal choice is the game's performance mode. Displaying at 1584p, this mode allows those with compatible displays to play the game at 120 frames per second. As was the case with Warzone, I can't really demonstrate how smooth Doom Eternal plays when running in this mode, but I found it to be a marked improvement over the other 2 options. Yes, it's not as crisp as balanced mode, and not as pretty as ray tracing mode, but slaying demons at double the frames makes this already intense shooter positively electrifying. I adore Doom Eternal, and this native PlayStation 5 upgrade manages to make it even better. Look, I can't lie to you, I'm a Borderlands fan. I like sitting in my underpants, turning my brain off and shooting pixels for hours at a time. It's also why I played Destiny, and why I'm banned from every video game arcade on the west coast of England because of what authorities refer to as an inappropriate way of playing Time Crisis 2. But I've gotta say, I bounced off Borderlands 3 on the PlayStation 4 pretty much immediately. On base PlayStation 4, the game ran at 30 frames per second, which is fine, but it suffered from terrible input lag that made the game practically unplayable. After upgrading to the PlayStation 4 Pro a few months later, I returned to the game only to find it suffered from the same input issues despite the new hardware. Not only that, but the Pro's performance mode barely managed to stick to 60 frames per second. It was clear that the game was pushing the aging console to its breaking point. Thankfully, the native PlayStation 5 version of Borderlands 3 runs like a dream. Aiming for 4K resolution and 60 frames per second, the game's default resolution mode fixes every issue I had with the original release of Borderlands 3. The improved hardware has removed all traces of input lag, and the game manages to hit that 60 frames per second target 99% of the time. Loading times are also dramatically reduced, and DualSense support adds some nice uses of the pad's adaptive triggers. This is definitively the best way to play Borderlands 3. There are still a few issues. Cutscenes are capped to 30 frames per second, which is a shame, and the game's performance mode, which renders events in 1080p at up to 120 frames per second, doesn't always quite hit that lofty target. Still, for those who found the game's original release to be disappointing, I recommend returning on PlayStation 5. A Plague Tale: Innocence is often regarded as one of the PlayStation 4's most underrated releases. Launching in 2019 to positive reviews, the game quickly vanished from the news cycle, seemingly destined to spend the rest of its days largely forgotten about by the gaming masses. Thankfully, this excellent story-driven adventure received a new lease of life earlier this year, thanks to a native PlayStation 5 upgrade that improved the game's visuals in a number of ways. For starters, Plague Tale now runs at a smooth 60 frames per second, and has received numerous subtle upgrades to its textures and lighting engine. The result is an already beautiful game that looks even nicer when running on Sony's hardware. Even better is the game's DualSense support, which adds some imaginative uses of the controller's features. For instance, holding R2 to run will see the triggers pulse with every footstep. A subtle, yet quite remarkable implementation. It's not the crispest game on this list, rendering at a native 1440p, but it doesn't matter. A Plague Tale: Innocence is a wonderful experience that's worth checking out on PlayStation 5. Considering The Last of Us Part 2 launched mere months before the PlayStation 5 hit store shelves, it's impressive how the game manages to outshine most next-gen exclusives with its stunning visuals that clearly pushed the PlayStation 4 to its absolute limit. Sony has yet to announce a full native re-release of the game for their new console, although believe me, I'd be surprised if a director's cut isn't on the cards. However, the team at Naughty Dog have released a minor patch that improves the game on PlayStation 5. The update allows the game to run at 60 frames per second, double that of the PlayStation 4 version. Like most games on this list, the improved frames do wonders for The Last of Us Part 2. Combat, already tense and ferocious, is even more so when viewed at 60 frames per second, and even exploration feels smoother and more natural thanks to the upgrade. More than anything else, it's the game's incredible animation work that benefits the most. Characters move and react to their environments in such vivid detail. It's as impressive today as it was upon release. The resolution remains the only issue. Rendering at a locked 1440p, the game's visuals look a touch fuzzy when viewed on a 4K display, but it's not a huge problem. The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece and remains so when played on PlayStation 5. Funny story, I was around 5 hours away from wrapping up this video when Guerrilla Games surprise dropped a Game Boost patch for their 2017 open world epic Horizon Zero Dawn. Talk about good timing. Fans of Aloy's original adventure have been clamouring for a framerate patch since the PlayStation 5 was first announced, and now that it's finally here, I'm pleased to report that it's absolutely astonishing. The Game Boost update doubles the original game's frame rate to a solid 60 frames per second, alongside increasing the game's resolution from 2160p to checkerboard 4K. Horizon was already a magnificent looking game, but at 4K, running at 60 frames per second, breathtaking. It's been a few years since I stepped foot in Horizon's post-apocalyptic world, but I was blown away by just how good it looks. Despite being 4 years old, the game's environments are bursting with colour and detail, elevated no doubt by the improved resolution introduced by the patch. Combat is also improved by the increased frames, with ferocious machines carrying more weight as they barrel towards you. Much like Days Gone, Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us Part 2 before it, the Game Boost patch for Horizon Zero Dawn is a revolution. There's never been a better time to experience this wonderful game for yourself than right now. So there we have it, 10 additional PlayStation 4 games that are even better on PlayStation 5. Did we miss anything? What's your favourite upgrade on PlayStation 5 so far? Or are there any games you'd love to see upgraded for Sony's new console? Let us know your various thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving it a like and make sure to subscribe to Push Square for everything PlayStation. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I spent a long time making it. Thank you, as always, for watching.